Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle where I talk about electronic music, both new and old, and today I'm talking about the new album from Zoo, Ringos Desert. Zoo is a fairly mainstream deep house artist who I covered a while back when his debut album Generation Y dropped in 2016. I've linked that review in the description, but basically back then I thought he was decent, if pretty similar to Disclosure, and I wasn't huge on his singing. And aside from that video having amassed a surprising amount of dislikes, I never really thought about the guy again. I'll admit that review isn't exactly the greatest video I've ever made. He's not a complete rip-off of Disclosure as I might have made him sound initially. But I mean, like, the album had some good moments and there wasn't anything outright bad on it, but I didn't find him all that interesting personally, and I just kind of forgot he existed after a while. But I have gotten a couple of requests to cover his follow-up album here. And those requests came in months ago, back when the entire first half of this album was released as an EP, Ringos Desert Part 1. I didn't check it out at the time, but now that Part 2 is out and the entire package is out as a full-length sophomore album, I figured, can't hurt to give it a shot out of curiosity. I haven't been following any single releases from this thing or paid attention to the guy at all. Though it does appear the majority of this album had already been released prior, so I guess bigger fans probably already knew most of it already. But I was going into it blind. I don't really have any more setup than that, so how does Ringo's Desert fare? Actually I think my opinion of this album is kind of similar to my thoughts on that last Rez album that I did not make a video on. I didn't have enough to say on that album, but basically I felt like that was a slightly different flavored, but otherwise basically rehashed follow-up that was overall enjoyable in basically all the same ways as her first album. Given this album has more meat on its bones than Certain Kind of Magic, I did actually have enough material for a proper video on Ringo's Desert, but honestly I was more into Rez's thing than I was this. That was at least up to par with her debut. This felt less impressive to me. I know Rez and Zoo have, like, nothing in common besides what I just mentioned. More kind of knocking out two birds with one stone there since I don't have a video for Rez. But yeah, my opinion is basically the same as that album, but I think this accomplished a little less as a follow-up. This album isn't that different from his debut. A lot of the same deep house formulas, his same babyish falsetto voice, albeit slightly less focused on the last time. Some different ideas applied to his sound, but otherwise it's just a more of the same album that I have more or less the exact same thoughts on. It's cool, it's inoffensive, but I doubt I'm ever going to listen to this or think about it again after this video goes up, and the general lack of progress is not something I can mark in his favor. In terms of individual tracks, I don't have interesting things to note about every track, but there are things to note. First of all, honestly, the majority of the best material here is in the previously released first half. I like the bounce your 6 on the floor beat of the opener, Stormy Love NM. I don't know what NM means. Not medical? Desert Woman is like the one track that has a more deserty feel than his other ones through its more eastern tinged melodies. And I guess Ghost in My Bed has a bit of it at the beginning with the spaghetti western guitars, and the opener has those crows and stuff, but like, it's barely there, and the rest of the material just goes back to that urban-tinged vibe that he had on his first album. You hear those same electric guitars and saxophones occasionally that kind of give me the feeling the whole desert thing doesn't actually have to do with anything. I suppose maybe if you kind of squirted Burned Babylon, it could have a tiny hint of Eastern flavor in there with those electric guitar solos. But if Thievery Corporation has taught me anything, it's that whenever you title something after Babylon, you're about to incorporate some kind of Jamaican flavor. And sure enough, that is exactly the impression I get off of that track with the accent of the one guy who's saying the title. And I suppose he doesn't have to aim for an overarching concept or theme. Just seems like he half went for one and gave up on it later. The rest of the first half, I guess, is cool. I guess I liked Provocateur just for having more of a groove, and Guilty Love was fun too, even if I was disappointed it wasn't a remix of Clavier Gavin's theme song from Apollo Justice Ace Attorney. But I didn't care for the sidechaining on Still Want You in the beginning of that one. And nothing else really stuck out to me in the first half. And as for the second half, quite frankly, it was even weaker stuff with even fewer standout tracks for me. I think a lot of it comes down to just Zoo's own voice, which I talked about in my review of his debut, but the same problems pop up here. Something has always rung hollow to me about this man's falsetto, something unnatural about it that I've just had a hard time pinning down. Again, he hits the notes, but something about his delivery is just off to me. I don't know if it's because they make him sound super young while trying to sound more mature than he actually is, or if it's because he's using his falsetto in an attempt to be more like The Weeknd, or what. I mean, he's definitely trying to be The Weeknd on the track Drowning, totally ripping off his entire sound off there, though it's not that obvious in other parts of the album. It seems like he's trying really hard to get his voice to sound like that, even though it doesn't naturally go there. And I also get the feeling he knows that too, because he often pitches his voice down. Or maybe he just does that because it's the cool thing to do these days, but I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of the pitch shifting either, but I guess it's better than pitching his voice up. And again, I know how rich it is, this critique of the guy's voice. For anyone who's been watching my videos who for a long enough time knows how terrible a singer I am. If you gave these songs to me to sing, no amount of auto-tune would be able to cure the massive downgrade I'd apply to them. I can't hit those high notes at all, so you can take it all with a grain of salt, but point is, I don't enjoy Zoo's voice, and the second half of this album focuses more on it than the first half did, so that's less fun for me. Most of it is just bland commercial R&B. Already mentioned the most blatant of Weeknd ripoffs and Drowning, but Coming Home isn't that far off either, though he also brings on Majid Jordan, or however you say that, to get him to imitate The Weeknd as well. Really the only track I enjoyed much at all in the second half on this album was My Life with Tame Impala, providing a neat psychedelic indie rock vibe, and ending the album on a positive note. That actually is a really nice track at the end there, maybe even my favorite in the bunch. And I guess Waters of Monaco is decent too, with all its synth arpeggios and the vocal performance, which reminds me a bit of Gregory Porter's appearance on Disclosure's Holding On. And a couple of interesting moments, though it didn't leave as strong an impression as I'd like to say it did. Also not sure what a song called Waters of Monaco is doing on a desert-themed album, but whatever. And that's basically all I have to add on this album. I just didn't really pull much out of this album that I found worth returning to, honestly. None of it is bad, it's enjoyable enough while it's on, but I don't see much of any growth in Zoo as an artist from his introduction, which I already wasn't exactly falling head over heels for in the first place. All of the good and bad things I said about Generation Y also apply to this album. Even the Tame Impala track, I like it, but isn't exactly a masterpiece. And the whole desert thing, it feels kind of tacked on and half-baked. Feels like he could have leaned into that more if he wanted to, but gave up on it a little past the halfway mark. I suppose if you're already a fan of Zoo, you'll enjoy this album, but that's assuming you haven't already heard all the best stuff from this album ahead of time, through his last EP and other single releases. And if you are into this kind of commercial deep house R&B hybrid, it's worth a shot. Even if I'd more recommend his first album to start with if you're going into him for the first time. But as for me personally, I'm still not sold on this guy. If anything, I'm less sold on him now than I was before. This is just a mostly bland deep house release that I'm never going to listen to again. If you loved it, that's great, but I just think it's average, and the guy's got some work to do if he wants to keep my attention any longer. I'm feeling a solid 6 out of 10 on this. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters, they're awesome people. If you want to add yourself to that list or make me review something, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.
Let me live my life. Let me live my